we've got to go out there and like build an actually good product that people actually want to use, that like actually solves their real world challenges from a developer perspective, from a user perspective. I think we have the pieces with Coinbase. I think a lot of it's now like, how do we put those together into a package that really, really works?
All right, everyone. I think you will really enjoy this episode of Empire. We have a pretty special one today. There's a big announcement coming out of Coinbase, and we brought on Will Robinson, the VP of Engineering, and Jesse, who is the head of protocols and lead for a new product that we're going to be talking about today. But Jesse, Will, welcome to Empire, guys. Santi, give you a big welcome too.
You're not even giving intros to me anymore, which is great.
Yeah, I skipped the intros for you. All right, guys. Well, I think by the time people are listening to this, the news will be out. You guys are launching this thing called Base, which is, I think how you're describing it, is an L2. The way that I'd like to actually start is, you guys might get mad at me for saying this, but the way I think about Coinbase is you guys are a Web 2 company that plays in crypto. And what I mean by that is like, you raised venture capital money, you have a board of directors, you're probably a Delaware C Corp, you're publicly traded, and you have done this amazing job of like moving the space forward by giving people an on-ramp into crypto. But really, like at the core, you're set up as a Web 2 company. And I've kind of watched, and Jesse, you've done this maybe more publicly than others at Coinbase, like watched your guys' journey into becoming more and more of a crypto native firm. So I think the best place to start here, I'd love to just hear you guys describe that journey, and then we can get into talking about this new L2 that you guys are building.
Awesome. Sounds great. And maybe I can take the lead on this one, Will, and then you can fill in the gaps around me. I'm Jesse. Hey, everyone. And I've been at Coinbase for 6 years. So I joined at the beginning of 2017, like right before the bull market really started. And I think your assessment is largely accurate. Like not only is Coinbase all those things, also Coinbase was started in 2012. Like Coinbase is 10 years old, a little more than 10 years old at this point. And so when we started the business, there was no Ethereum, there was no smart contracts, there was Bitcoin, and we provided a Web 2 interface for customers to acquire Bitcoin. And then over time, we added the ability for customers to acquire Ethereum and Litecoin, and then more and more assets. And I think really in the last 5 years, probably starting in around 2018, we started really proactively trying to figure out, okay, like we've done this whole exchange and trading thing, and we see this future, which is the global economy replatformed onto the crypto economy, powered by millions of dApps that, billions of users use. How do we get there, both for the broader ecosystem and for Coinbase itself? And really credit to Brian for seeing that early. In 2016, he wrote the Coinbase Secret Master Plan, which was like the 4-part plan. It's like, first, we're going to do the protocols, Bitcoin, Ethereum. Then we're going to build the exchange, Coinbase. Then we're going to build the consumer interfaces, Coinbase Wallet and, Coinbase dApp Wallet. And then we're going to have these dApps that billions of people actually want to use. And that's been the master plan we've been running. But that final stage 3 to 4, I think has been a process of trying to figure out how do we drive that. And I think Base is our answer, kind of. It's Base 3.5. It's the developer platform that I think we realized we needed internally to change the Coinbase way of building, so we could start building as an on-chain native company. And then once we realized we needed that internally, then we realized, if we need this internally, other people probably do too. And that's why we're kind of launching it as an open ecosystem that everyone can build on. And so happy to go into the details of what that journey's been over the last few years, but that's kind of the high level path that I think we've been on.
Yeah, I love all that. I'll just add one thing. I think for historical reasons, or just where we are as an industry right now, the parts of the quadrants that are lit up rather, are small Web3 companies and large Web2 companies. And as a sort of accident of history and sequencing, that those are really highly correlated. But we all see and are moving toward a world where it's going to be Web3 companies, big and small. And Microsoft, Adobe, take your favorite big software provider, will eventually have on-chain components of how they build and ship software. That is a future that we are have full conviction over. And if Coinbase can't be the large existing software company to lead the way in that charge, then who can? So we decided it was time to take up the mantle.
Tell us about Base, Jesse.
Yeah. So like I said, I think our feeling is over the last 10 years, we've done a really good job of driving that kind of like trading, exchange, on-ramping of funds into the crypto economy. But mostly that kind of speculative side of things has been where things have stayed. And so I think Base and Base is an Ethereum L2 that Coinbase is incubating and going to gradually decentralize and is going to be the home for the Coinbase ecosystem, as well as a fully open ecosystem where anyone can build. And we really see Base as this platform that's going to make it incredibly easy for the next wave of developers to build the dApps that will then bring in the next billion users. And there's a whole kind of story of how we got to building an Ethereum L2, kind of what the pieces we're putting around Base are to make that really easy. But I think that's the gist of it. It's like we want to make it easy for developers to build really freaking useful apps that people actually want to use, so we can get out of this kind of speculation-driven world and into the next phase of the crypto economy, which is billions of people finding real utility on-chain.
So a lot of the, I guess a lot of folks listening to this might say, wait a minute. So like, isn't the whole purpose of Coinbase to keep users within the Coinbase kind of ecosystem? And might this just like, once you open the door for people to go into this kind of open Web3 land, are you losing the user, And this is something we hear often, like with Coinbase Wallet. And then of course with this, I'm curious, like what you would say to that.
So I'll jump in here and say the purpose of Coinbase is to increase economic freedom in the world. I hate to be hokey and cheesy and go to our mission statement, but I've got the tattoo, and we really actually do believe in this.
Wait, Will, you have a Coinbase tattoo, or you have that statement?
That statement, metaphorically speaking. Don't let Brian hear this. I don't actually have the tattoo, but this is not a casual mission statement that we ignore or give lip service to, and a greater supply of quality block space that settles to a credibly neutral, decentralized, permissionless settlement layer with ultra high security. We are still really early on that journey, right? Like you can imagine 5 years out, 10 years out, that space being sort of fully saturated, this kind of background that we all take for granted, but we're not there yet. So we think that the world needs more block space of that kind, and that increases economic freedom in the world. And, I'll be honest, I think we chart a lot of different future paths and sort of business impact that this could have. We don't exactly know which way this will go or when or how quickly it will get there. But I think we're really excited to push this experiment along and make a high level bet that more people using crypto for more things, both reflexive things like investments and speculation, and also non-reflexive things just to live their lives, do social networking, play crypto games. This is going to be a rising tide that lifts all boats, and Coinbase will participate in some of that. I think that we have pole position in the West, for example, as a fiat on and off ramp. And there are lots of other places like that where our sort of weakness from the point of view of a like die-hard decentralization maxi, that we do have this Web 2 component, that we are a centralized entity, that we've got an address, that we talk to regulators, is actually a superpower, because someone needs to create and man that bridge that says, okay, well, how do you get your real world assets on and off chain? How do you know you're entering this space in a way that is safe, that is well trod before you? And I think Coinbase is in a unique position to add and extract a lot of value to the ecosystem that way without needing to hold people hostage in some walled garden to make a good business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, strong plus one to that. And the only other thing I'll add is this is not our first time making this bet of like, if we grow the ecosystem, it's going to be good for Coinbase's business. In the depths of the bear market, in 2018, we launched USDC. Now USDC obviously has had a huge impact on the usability of crypto globally. And it's also turned out to be a good component of Coinbase's business. We launched Coinbase Wallet. That's a self-custodial wallet. Those people aren't creating Coinbase accounts. Those people are just using that software to access the crypto economy. CBETH, I think, is similar to that. The dApp wallet. I think our bet is that if we give users and developers better and better tools to make the crypto economy useful, it will grow it. And that growth will be good for Coinbase. And we'll find ways to make that good for our business alongside it being good for the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, as you sort of surveyed the existing L2, first L1 and then L2 kind of environment and options, why go and choose Optimism? And my understanding is you're coming on as like a core contributor to Optimism. So maybe talk a little bit about that journey and the rationale behind it.
Yeah. And this has been a really, diligent, thorough process that we've run over really like the last year and a half, probably. And I guess it started about a year and a half ago when we started working with our internal teams to try and figure out, what do you need to build more on-chain products? Like, what's blocking you? And what we saw, through running some prototypes ourselves and through talking to teams, was that folks were getting stuck like literally before they could start. And they were really getting stuck on two questions. One was literally, how do I build an on-chain product? I.e., what language am I using to write a smart contract? Am I writing in EVM? Am I writing with Rust and Solana? Am I writing the app chain on Avalanche or Cosmos? And then most people were kind of figuring that out for themselves. And the vast majority of kind of internal teams were by default just picking EVM because it's the most widely used toolkit. But then they were getting stuck again with like, okay, now I've written these contracts. Like, where do I put them? How do I make sure that's cheap enough that we can actually scale it for Coinbase users? How do I make sure that it works reliably across all the Coinbase products? How do I make sure that when I launch this thing, it's going to be like good for the Coinbase ecosystem? And people were again getting stuck being like, wow, there's a bunch of options. I want to do Ethereum L1. I know it's too expensive. I want to do L2. We don't know what to do. And so in the first half of last year, we really kind of did a survey of the first question, the how, and talked to a bunch of teams, both internally and externally, and basically aligned that like Ethereum and EVM is the fastest growing developer ecosystem. It's the largest ecosystem by kind of overall value. And from a default perspective, that's kind of the paved road that we pave for our internal teams. And then after that kind of gave us two pieces of clarity. One is, well, if we're going to be building primarily on EVM, we need to have a clear strategy for scaling EVM, whether, regardless of what L2 we're picking. And so that's when we started working on something called EIP 4844, which is this thing called proto-dank sharding. It's going to lower fees by 10 to 100x on L2s. And Coinbase, alongside Optimism, has been working on that now for a year. And we're hopeful we're going to ship it this summer. Which is about a year earlier than otherwise would have happened. So that was the first thing. And then the other thing that we did was we went and talked with everyone and said, okay, like our teams want to be building on EVM. We're making that the paved road. We know Ethereum L1 is too expensive. Like, how are you thinking about L2? And we were just so blown away at the quality of talent across like literally every team working in and around the L2 space, across the ZK side and the optimistic rollup side. And I think as we went through that process, we actually had a pretty big perspective shift in our thinking. And I think that perspective shift was when we started, we were very much of the mindset of there's going to be one L2. It's going to be monolithic. And if we like pick the wrong one, that's going to be bad for Coinbase users. It's going to be bad for Coinbase's business. Like, it's almost like zero sum. And I think when we ended that process after talking to a ton of folks, I think what we're very convinced of now is that there's actually probably going to be many of these things. There's going to be L2s, there's going to be L3s, and they're going to kind of all collectively scale Ethereum and increasingly become interoperable as this technology matures, as it standardizes, to form something like a mesh or a super chain where you have a bunch of different execution contexts scaling the broader kind of Ethereum layer one. And I think in that world, that vision was the thing that kind of gave us the clarity of like, whoa, if that's the future, making sure that Coinbase has a native home, like in that mesh, feels really, really important. Now, rewinding a little bit, now, how did we, in that context, start working with Optimism so closely? I think a lot of it actually came from Ethereum. When we started working on EIP 4844, they were the other team that raised their hand about a year ago. That gave us the context in which we were literally shipping code together. That built trust. We got to go really deep on their technology, literally as we were standing up DevNets for EIP 4844 to like experiment with running a roll up on the DevNet. And I think across the board, we were impressed with the quality of the technology, the quality of the team, and the ethos around the technology being open source, freely available, and something that contributes back to the underlying public good infrastructure. I think that's really, really important. We believe that, like Ethereum, layer 2 must be open source, freely available, and something that is built to be as decentralized as possible, because that's the only way we're going to be able to create this global crypto economy that's open and accessible to everyone. We felt like Optimism really had those values, that the technology represented that. And then obviously that we built a relationship through building together on Ethereum that could kind of stand the test of time. So, a bunch of different factors, but we're super excited to be working with them. And I think we're super excited to be working with everyone. This is going to be a massive team effort. We are on day 0 of scaling Ethereum. We have, I think there's about 1 to 2 million monthly transacting users in Ethereum today. We need to get that to billions. And so over the next 5 years, the amount of growth, the amount of opportunity for people to come together and scale this thing together in a positive some way, and everyone benefit from that upside, just feels incredible.
Can you guys explain? I think I'm not fully understanding where you guys sit in the tech stack. So actually, like, this sounds like an L3 to me, which is like you've got like ETH is the L1, then like Optimism's the L2, and you guys are building on Optimism, so that's an L3. Can you explain where I'm wrong here?
Yeah, great. So we're not building on Optimism, we're building on the OP stack, which is an open source toolkit that's basically for running chains. And so what's going to happen is basically Optimism mainnet will be running here, and then Base will stand up next to it. And then what we're going to do over the next 2 to 3 years is we're basically going to figure out what's the integration work that we do by being on the same stack, so that those things can actually be more and more interoperable. So you can have transactions happening between them. So you can have bridges happening really easily between them. And so you can add a bunch more L2s or L3s that also have that same level of composability that's going to enable us to kind of collectively scale Ethereum.
So, Santi, before you jump in, just one more question, because I want to make sure I actually understand that. What if Blockworks would probably not give someone the underlying like open source software if we had it to go build a media company, because then they'd be competing with us. So like, I'm trying to think about the business model behind Optimism and like OP Stack. It's like OP Stack's giving you the operating system to go build an L2, which like on paper competes with Optimism, but has this premise that in a couple of years it'll integrate and like bring like 1 + 1 = 3. But really in the short term, it does sound like a competitor to Optimism. So tell me what I'm missing here.
No, I think you're actually spot on in the tension. And I think that the thing that's allowing us to do this is kind of the trust and belief that we can build this thing that's greater than the sum of the parts. And I think that's what we're working on with Optimism. And one of the things we're excited about is, as part of running Base, we're actually going to be contributing back to the retroactive public goods funding mechanism and the Optimism Collective to make sure that we're sustainably funding that infrastructure alongside them. And so I feel like the thing we are doing here is new, right? Like, no, you haven't actually previously had a large public company do a agreement with an open source technology provider that also has a DAO that's building the future kind of technology infrastructure of the world. This is a first, and it looks a little different maybe than other business deals, but I think the thing that's built into that is this shared belief that if we build an open source, interoperable layer 2, there is so much upside, there's so much growth that we're going to be able to basically find the complements in the various people who are working together, make sure that they get to win-win outcomes. And that's exactly what we're doing with Optimism. I couldn't be more excited to be working with them.
I want to get a little bit more of the history context behind just even thinking about building Base. Jesse, you mentioned you've been around and looking at perhaps on the table of engineering projects that you could have had or have at the moment. Why decide to do this now? Like, what were some of the other things, or what are some of the other things on that like whiteboard that before you kind of made the decision to like throw a bunch of engineering resources to L2s building Base? Like, why now? And what were some of the other things that you could have focused on instead of this.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I've been at Coinbase for 6 years at this point. I spent the first 4.5 years building and leading all of our consumer-facing teams on the engineering side. So Coinbase, Coinbase Pro, Coinbase Wallet. And then mid-2021, I basically took a step back and said, like, I want to figure out, like, how do we make this change? Like, I've been building these consumer facing products that are Web2 products with crypto in them. And like, I want to figure out how do we unlock this incredibly talented, incredibly generative business to be building Web3 native on-chain products. And like Will said, I came to Will and, our exec team, I think like fall of 2021. And it was like, we need to do it all. And like, we need to do it right now. And that began what was a total journey. And candidly for me, like, felt a lot like wandering in the desert. Whereas like I think we went through 4 different iterations over a year where it was like, we're going to do this. And we did that for 3 months. And we got to the end of 3 months and said, it doesn't feel quite right. Like, we're not getting the customer feedback internally that we're looking for. Let's like try again.
Jesse, what were those ideas that you guys did and then like shut down? Tell us about the failed ones.
So the two failed ones that were most recently, to be clear, I actually don't think about these things as failed. One was like, I think what basically happened is we started having this conception of, like Coinbase and our broader suite of products, including the consumer interfaces all the way down to the underlying infrastructure, almost as a marketplace, where there are a bunch of different layers and something you could almost analogize to like an app store or an app platform. And that meant that we, over like a period of 9 months, we basically worked our way down through the marketplace. And so the first thing that we were at was like, oh, what if like this thing is an advertising network and like that's what we're building? And what the goal of it is to basically figure out how do we connect up the distribution of Coinbase to all of these developers that are building these incredible products, but right now have really inefficient acquisition tools. Like, that's what token airdrops are. They're really inefficient ads products. And so we were like, okay, let's build that marketplace. And we built that for a little while and we learned a lot, but like, didn't feel like it quite stuck, although we're also in the process right now of rolling out the first iteration of that. And I think it's going to be awesome. A lot of that, came from the same place. So then the next thing we really focused on was identity, and looking at like, basically, could we bring a representation of Coinbase identity, including like the verified as a human, and potentially KYC on chain? And would that allow our internal teams to basically build products that were more tailored to the real human beings that were behind wallet addresses? And again, there we launched the first version of the product, and we're expanding on it to CB.ID. We have plans for the year ahead that's going to bring more Coinbase identity on chain, which I'm super excited about. But I think at the core, we also didn't feel like this is the thing. And then I think we worked to like the bottom layer of the stack, which is like, we've been trying to build these products. We've been working with all these internal teams. And like, when we tried to build the advertising product, when we tried to build the identity product, we got stuck. Like, we tried to figure out, where do we deploy these things? How do we make it low cost enough? How do we make the tooling good enough? And we came back to this question of like, how do we build? Where do we build? And I think after having done that 3 times, in kind of second half of last year, we basically said, okay, let's take a month and be like, what would it look like for us to build the developer platform, like the base of this ecosystem, which we can then on top of build all of this other infrastructure that will eventually come together to make this like a powerful platform for distribution and for people building products that use real world identity. And that's when Base kind of originated. And like Will said, I feel like I had gone through a year of every quarter trying to pitch to Will and our executive team, like, this is it, advertise, this is it, identity, this is it. And got honestly like pretty lukewarm responses where people were like, we don't know if this is it. And then we got to the conception of Base. And I think for the first time, it really clicked.
Yeah. Can you dissect a little more of the actual thesis itself? you've enabled support for L2 withdrawals. So presumably users can now go directly from Coinbase to some of the L2s, right? I believe it's like pretty much most at this point. So what is this enhancing? Like, what does this actually add? When you talk about a secure, low-cost, developer-friendly L2, you're building on the OP stack. But I'd love to dissect that a little bit more to understand, like, what is the value add of what you're already doing today, which is enabling withdrawals to an L2 environment where the user is already getting a lot of the benefits.
Yeah. And the way that I think about this is basically like if we pull back into the user experience for like the everyday user, I think for the last 5 years, we have been in a very kind of like chain centric mental model where we are basically saying, hey, users, you need to pick which chain you're going to run your application on. You need to pay the fees for the compute of that application running on this chain. And for a small segment of the world, that's worked. Right? Like that's the 1 million monthly transacting users that we have. And I think we've seen pretty consistently that like it's not working more broadly, right? We're not seeing month over month growth of real world applications that people are using and are bringing kind of like joy into their lives and increasing their economic freedom. And I think one of our theses is that a lot of that chain centricness basically came from us, like trying to figure out like what's the right infrastructure for building applications. And I think our perspective is that is shifting from this like undefined, unanswered question into like a relatively defined and executable question, which is we now know what that infrastructure is roughly going to look like. And what our sites have to turn to is, okay, now how do we enable developers to build applications really, really easily for that infrastructure? And then how do we make it really, really easy for users to use those applications without having to worry about any of the complexity? And I think this is where Coinbase has a really unique position, right? We can launch Base. We're launching Base. We have an incredible suite of developer tools that Will has been kind of building over the last year and a half. That means we can offer this like platform for developers to build really high quality applications. And then we have the most trusted, easiest to use consumer interfaces in Coinbase and Coinbase Wallet for leveraging applications that are deployed into the crypto economy. And we can plug Base into those interfaces and make it so that for our users, it all just works. They don't need to be like, oh, how do I worry about this? It just works. And that's not to say that we don't want our users to keep going everywhere and keep using other chains. And actually, one of the values in Base that we cite very frequently is this concept of a bridge, not an island, which we can talk about in a second. But the thesis is basically like most users don't want the complexity of having to make a bunch of technology choices of where their applications are going to run. We can give them sane defaults that are easy to use, secure, and low cost. And then we can create experiences that allow them to go elsewhere so they can explore the full crypto economy by creating a native platform in the crypto economy that Coinbase can build infrastructure around to connect users to those other places. And I think like what I've seen pretty consistently as I've transitioned from doing kind of the more off-chain world to the more on-chain world is the level of leverage that you can get from building applications on this new on-chain platform is really incredible, right? You look at like Uniswap V3 or V2, like those are massive financial pieces of infrastructure that were built by a handful of engineers. And that's because the platform that they are building on, because it is global, because it has this intense level of composability and open source, is just very, very powerful. And so I think one of the things that I'm very convinced of is that on-chain is the next online as like a kind of seismic shift in the way developers build, where in the early 2000s, we saw this thing happen where like if you could build online applications, you could reach 10x more people at 10x less the cost. And it was this superpower where you had new applications start to emerge that like did things that were previously totally impossible. And I think we are right on the cusp, or it's probably have already passed, where that's starting to be true, where we're going to be able to build on-chain applications that are 10x higher leverage, built by 10x fewer engineers, and have 10 to 100x the distribution and impact on this new platform. And I think that's what it's all about. That's why we're building Base, so that we can create a home and a native platform where Coinbase, starting with our internal teams, but then obviously with the broader community, can accelerate that on-chain platform and make it really easy for us to think about this as like a business decision of like, do we want this in our legacy off-chain POA sidechain? Or would it be more efficient, higher leverage, more accessible to more customers if we put this in the kind of like new platform that's fully on-chain?
Yeah, let me just maybe play devil's advocate. So one of the things, so I heard this announcement. I was like, oh, that's fascinating. Like, I love that you guys are doing this. And then the second thing I was thinking is like, how will Wall Street respond? Because you guys have the really enjoyable experience of being a public company. And so you do have to think about how the market will respond. And one way the market could respond is they're building something that could eventually compete with them. And like, I think of Uniswap, I think of Coinbase competitors, and like there were periods of time during DeFi summer when like Uniswap's volume outpaced Coinbase's volumes. And like, I think it's tough to argue that that Uniswap is not a competitor to Coinbase. I think you guys are directly competing. And with Base, some of the things that get built on top of Base will directly compete with Coinbase's core products. So I'm curious how you guys think about that.
I think that's exactly right. And I think one thing we didn't really talk about is just like the cultural impact that we've seen over the last 6 months as we've started building this. Like it's
Wait,
hard.
Jeff, before going into that, I'll ask that. Can we? I want to get the answer to the competitive thing because that's one thing I'm curious, and then and then we can go into that. So basically the question was around like, how do you think about building? Products that get built on Base will end up competing with Coinbase's core products, and how do you think about that trade-off?
Yeah. So I think, again, going back to kind of Brian's secret master plan that he wrote in 2016, which always blows my mind. I think we from the beginning have felt that there's going to be thousands or millions of dApps that create the billions of users that come into the crypto economy. And we're not the first company to kind of like see a platform shift happen in that way and anticipate it and engage with it and make that something that's, successful for our business. I think Apple is the canonical example here, or Netflix is another great one, where those were large scale consumer companies that were aggregating user demand and basically saw, hey, we're about to experience a massive platform shift. For Netflix, it was digital. For Apple, it was mobile. And both of them said, okay, what if rather than us being kind of the sole point of distribution, us being the one that builds the products, we figure out how to build the platform that we can obviously still distribute first-party products on, but also create a level playing field for third parties to build businesses on. And if we can do that, couldn't that be so much more than us just doing everything ourselves? And I think that's the same bet here. It's a bet that, yes, there will be things that compete on Base with Coinbase, and we're going out tomorrow or whenever we launch it, Thursday, with a bunch of partners that are directly competitive with components of Coinbase's business. And that's okay. That's good. That's healthy. That's part of what we're doing here is we're trying to build an open ecosystem that we think can grow the crypto economy and bring these use cases into the crypto economy. And we're confident that Coinbase and Coinbase's business will only benefit from us going from 1 million monthly transacting users to 1 billion monthly transacting users. The pie is so big, and if we can enable that next wave of growth, we're gonna have a lot of upside for our business.
I think this is something that is, not to get into too much of the psychology of Wall Street, but time and time again, they don't seem to understand, like when social media was coming around, like Facebook was doing its IPO, like they didn't get it, like that it was all about like, how social, like they didn't truly understand the power of social networks. And in this case, like it's actually like pretty, I'm not surprised that they're not getting this open source model and how it actually works. And you're seeing like a public company, like kind of like morph out of its current shell and like move into different lines of businesses. And as you said, admittedly like cannibalizing certain lines of businesses. But you're right. if this is really going to work, you need to believe that this space is going to grow to billions of users. Otherwise, just close shop. Like it's just a side experiment. It doesn't really matter.
This is reflected in Wall Street still primarily thinking about us as an exchange or a consumer brokerage, whereas internally for the last 2 years, our North Star is we're going to be the gateway to Web3. That's like that. Is the exchange a part of that vision? Absolutely. But being the gateway to Web3 is just, from our perspective, such a huge opportunity. It's the gateway to the crypto economy.
You're going to need an on-ramp, a credible, really reliable, trustworthy, like on and off ramp, and then you're gonna allow people to interact in this, app store of sorts, and then ultimately come back to Coinbase to do other stuff, right? I want to also touch on, we recently had a power outage, and I think it's fairly symbolic to what I want to ask next, which is sometimes you see a tension of like projects that want to build on a particular chain, and then either, you have these like competing L1s, like you have the EVM compatible like avalanches of the world. They took a lot of like the source code of Ethereum and design, and then like modified their own, because admittedly it was like they had their own token. They could control more of their destiny. Then you have stuff like Cosmos where like you can just fork the SDK, like Tendermint's pretty battle tested. In this case, like I want to explore a little bit more of the decision of when you're building on the open, like the Optimism like SDK. What are some of the things that you like envision like having more degrees of freedom versus just like trying to work with them? They obviously have their own, like the Optimism token, and that's a governance token. You could just like acquire a bunch of that and then like have more sway. But here you've decided to like just take their SDK and like build your own base, which I don't think is going to have a token, or at least you don't plan on having a token. So what kind of relationships are you going to have with developers, of like what kind of committee of like there's going to have to be things that are going to have to be, determined by a committee. So I'm kind of curious how all this is going to work.
Great question. And first thing I want to be clear about, we're working super closely with Optimism on this. This is not a kind of like fork and go do our own thing. I think Will said this earlier, but we've looked at doing a chain many times before, 2 times before, specifically in 2018, 2020. And we said no those 2 times. And probably the biggest reason why we felt comfortable saying yes this time is because we felt like we could build it as a part of a bigger whole. And that's a part of a bigger whole in 2 ways. One, as a layer 2, we are part of the Ethereum ecosystem, which means we get the interoperability, the composability, the ability for users to move assets on and off base and onto Ethereum. And then 2, by building it on an open source technology stack, we're going to be part of this larger super chain that we think is going to emerge at layer 2. And so that commitment to not doing an alternative L1, not creating an island, but instead explicitly designing this, working really closely with Optimism to be deeply integrated into the largest crypto ecosystem in the world, I think is the thing that got us over the hump and say, yes, this is a good thing for us to do. So in terms of the kind of outcomes that we're able to drive by kind of taking the technology stack and deploying our own instance of it and making our own, I think a lot of it is about alongside being a part of the broader whole, having the reason and the context where we can invest in that core infrastructure to make it work really, really great, and to give our teams, our business, the surety that you can kind of only get if you're running your roadmap and you're in control of your own destiny. And so specific examples of this are things like scaling, right? Like we look at it today and we're like, the fees are still too high. It's not feasible for people to be paying 10 to 50 cent fees on layer 2 and have that globally kind of scaled. And so what do we need to do? We need to lower the fees. Before, we could do that and out of the goodness of our hearts, and it would help the ecosystem. But now we're in the trenches every day trying to run our own chain, trying to figure out how do we make this work? How do we make this scale? How do we make this more effective for our business? And that's a massive motivator for us to put more resources, more energy, and to set our own timelines on getting that chain to scale. That's one example. Another example is account abstraction, which Will mentioned, where it's like today wallets, they're still too hard to use. That's a mix of wallet interfaces, but then also chain level infrastructure. Before, we could do the wallet stuff, and then we could go and like kind of find people and be like, hey, can we line up our roadmaps? Can we make this work? Now we can say, no, if we believe account abstraction is important, let's put the team on building the core infrastructure and the wallet and have them work really closely together with the customer mindset of we're going to deliver an incredible product and actually ship that thing. And that's what we're doing. And I think that like autonomy and ownership and the feeling of like we can make the sustained investments in the underlying infrastructure because we know that's going to have a direct impact on our user experience kind of uniquely comes from having like feeling ownership over the platform, and feeling like if we invest in this platform, it's going to pay dividends for our business, for our ecosystem, for our community. And I think the important thing is that we're not just doing that for us. We're doing it on an open source platform that's freely available, that's plugged into Ethereum. So all of the investment that we drive from Coinbase into this platform then gets pushed out into the broader ecosystem so everyone can benefit from it. And that kind of gives us the best of both worlds. We can be a part of the larger ecosystem and we can have our own home that drives that investment and puts the full force of Coinbase's, capabilities behind scaling the underlying infrastructure, which I think is the biggest blocker right now for us making the crypto economy happen.
Yeah. In open source, a lot of the value capture and like continuity really rests on having a token, I believe. Versus traditional open source. Now we can talk about like there are different kinds of tokens and value accrual is still TBD for some, but nonetheless, to incentivize developers, like tokens become a really valuable currency, I think. Do you envision Base having a token at some point?
So we have no plans to have a token. I think our thesis is that tokens obviously have been an incredibly powerful tool for driving activity. But also sometimes they have obfuscated what has been a lack of product market fit for either like protocols that are products or chains that are platforms for people building on. And I'd go so far as to say that from a developer perspective, I think Ethereum is probably the only chain at this point that has real product market fit in a scaled way. Maybe there's some other ones that are very early on, but I'd say Ethereum has real product market fit for like large scale financial use cases from a developer perspective. And then you have a bunch of other players that are basically trying to figure out like, how do we find product market fit for developers who are building dApps that can reach like massive scale? I'd say everything is pretty much pre-product market fit at this point. And I think what we're seeing a lot with tokens is we're seeing people compensating for a lack of product market fit as a result of technology not being there or whatever by saying, hey, like we're going to use an incentive to drive people here. And I think that that's reasonable, right? You can use incentives to kickstart markets, but I think our thesis is that that's not the only way to make this work. The other way to make it work is to build a platform that has real product market fit. And I think where we believe that that's going to come from is a chain that has the low cost, secure, and decentralization characteristics that we're focused on in building with Base. And then interfaces like Coinbase and Coinbase Wallet that provide user distribution to applications on that chain. And that if we do that thing well, that can stand alone. That can just deliver value to developers because they can build apps and get distribution to users. And it can deliver value to users because they can access all these apps that are emerging. And so I think one of the things that kind of gets me excited about not having a token is like we're running on the metal, right? Like we've got to go out there and like build an actually good product that people actually want to use that like actually solves their real world challenges from a developer perspective, from a user perspective. I think we have the pieces with Coinbase. I think a lot of it's now like, how do we put those together into a package that really, really works? And I think we're going to do it.
Yeah. When you talk about like the actual metal itself, like you mentioned in the kind of earlier parts of the episode of this idea of being a bridge, not just for Optimism, but like other L2s, potentially other chains. Talk to us a little bit more about how you envision that process, that sequence happening.
Yeah, and this is a value. The value internally around Base is there's a few of them, but the one that this one is, it's a bridge, not an island. That's the thing that we like hammer home into our teams, and what that means is, in building Base, we do not want to create an island where we are locking users into Coinbase products, where we're locking them into like our part of the world. Instead, we want to think about it as a way where we can take users who are currently off chain, bring them on chain into a reasonable default that has a great foundation, and then basically build on chain native bridges and interfaces from that home into all of the other parts of the crypto economy. And so in that way, Base basically becomes this vehicle through which we can bridge users from the off-chain world into the entire crypto economy. So that's the kind of like vision. That's the approach that we're taking in terms of how we actually do that. Obviously, the way we're building this as the Ethereum L2, we're going to have that bridge to Ethereum by default. That felt really important to us because it's, the largest by TVL, largest developer ecosystem, most interconnected from a hub perspective. By building on the OP stack, I think we are working to basically figure out how do we build an interoperable, standardized, open source, freely available layer 2 that anyone can run and basically plug in. That's going to take time, over the next 1 to 2 years, I think, for us to figure out exactly how do we make that work as well as it can. And then we've started, conversations and I think are making progress with a bunch of the other ecosystems, folks like Solana, folks like Polygon, who obviously is building L2s, but also has their kind of L1 POS ecosystem, Avalanche, and then a bunch of the kind of already existing multi-chain bridge providers around like how do we make it so all this works really well on Base. So you can get from Base to Solana, you can get from Base to Avalanche, you can get from Base to Polygon POS, and that can be done in a secure, scalable, easy to use way for both users and developers. And, that's going to be a process as well. But I think the important thing for us is like, we don't want to silo people on this chain. That's not our goal. Our goal is to use this as a platform that allows us to bring everyone into the crypto economy by creating that bridge.
Jesse, will this be permissionless or permissioned at the beginning to go build on top of?
Permissionless, fully permissionless.
And do you think that Coinbase will end up building? So obviously you will want as many devs as possible to come build on it. I'm assuming I think I saw you'll do like an ecosystem fund. I think that you guys are announcing that as well. Do you think that Coinbase will also start to break out teams to go build on this? And if so, like what could you envision building there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Coinbase already is starting to have teams build on Base. And I think, again, the perspective is folks are going to build on Base. Base is probably going to be the default. It's going to be the hub. But we want to make sure our products are accessible everywhere. And so let's say we launch an identity product. Maybe we're going to put all the rights and the data on Base. But there should be interfaces where you can go and use that identity on Optimism Mainnet, on Ethereum, on Polygon, on Solana. And all that should just work. And we think that that's really possible, and that the technology is there to basically make it so you can have that interoperability across chains. So teams at Coinbase are already starting to do this. Some of the things that I'm really excited about, obviously identity. We rolled out our cb.id ENS integration where you can claim a subdomain of ENS cb.id. That's free for users. We're doing work to bring that on chain and make that more interoperable, composable. There's a lot that we're doing and thinking about around distribution. How do we basically make it so application or protocol developers can say, hey, we're looking for these kinds of users, and we can help them find those users in the Coinbase user base and make that a win-win for the developers and for the users by kind of connecting up those incentives. So that's another one that I'm really excited about. I think all of the financial services offerings I'm really excited about. If you go into Coinbase Wallet today or you go into our DApp wallet in Coinbase, we have first-party interfaces for Swap, for Bridge, for Borrow, for Lend. Those are powered by third-party applications, and I expect we're going to continue having them powered by third-party applications. But we also have the first-party interface that feels really important, and so those things are going to come to Base and be supported. And
so you don't think actually like Base? if you don't, so like right now, I haven't actually gone into that and to see like the swap and borrow and lend. I got to play around with that, but like, let's say like swaps is powered by, I don't know, Matcha or like or Zero X or like a Paraswap. I don't know who powers it, but like if I were Coinbase, I would think about, I want to eventually own that. So could we one day see Coinbase build their own Uniswap like competitor, or on top of Base, or like build their own swaps mechanism on top of Base and try to actually own that relationship?
I think as we've talked about, this is like an ecosystem. We want it to be an open ecosystem, and in that ecosystem, we expect that we'll have first-party applications and third-party applications. And I think the thing that becomes problematic in an ecosystem is if the first party starts to crowd out all of the third party applications. And so I think that's the tension, right? Like if we went and said, hey, we're just going to replace every dApp out there, I think maybe that would short term be good for Coinbase, but in the long term, I think it would mean users would be less likely to use our products, because at the end of the day, the ecosystem, the crypto economy is the thing that's going to be the most creative, and we're going to have some wins in there. We're going to find the places that we can uniquely contribute, but we can't do it all. We're a big company, but we're not that big a company, and no one company can do it all. And so I think the goal for us is to figure out where are the places that Coinbase can uniquely contribute value. And how do we uniquely contribute that value, enable developers, and also leverage the incredible brilliance and incredible products that developers in the ecosystem are building to offer great experiences for our customers.
I think as we start to wrap this up, actually, I have one more question here. You might have already explained this, or maybe I just wasn't smart to follow along enough here, but the business model, Jesse, like when I think about the business models of L2s, like the way I understand Arbitrum, for example, is like, one, they've got the token that can help fund the business, but also like they auction off the sequencer. And there's like an MEV component as well. Like, what is the business model of Base?
Yeah. So I think the long-term goal from a business perspective is create more applications that users want to use. That is the North Star. Because at the end of the day, if there are more applications that users want to use and they're using them through Coinbase interfaces, that's a great business for us, right? Like if you go into Coinbase Wallet and you use the swap interface, yes, it's powered by Zero X, but also we're providing a service of making that really easy, and we're comfortable taking a fee for that, and users are comfortable paying a fee for that. And so I think our base thesis and the primary business kind of motivator for doing this is create a bunch more applications that users want to use, so we can then expose them through our consumer interfaces and generate revenue and growth to the business through that. So that's the primary kind of motivator. It's create more innovation, more useful applications, and then let those kind of get surfaced through the consumer interfaces. I think from a kind of pure chain perspective, there's two potential sources of revenue: gas fees, which are kind of net the cost of bundling those transactions and putting them on L1, and then MEV on the chain. MEV is not something that we're enabling right now. We're just going to be ordering everything by priority and the time it comes into the sequencer. We think it's really important that we don't do that. We don't want to be trading against our customers or doing anything that looks like that. In the future, we'll decentralize the block building, and that will open up opportunities for other people to be doing MEV. And in that context, I can imagine that being a revenue stream. And then the other one is kind of transaction fees on the chain, which we expect to be relatively small in the grand scheme of our overall business. And I think we're still trying to understand exactly how that will shape up as fees continue to get driven down through 4844. So again, I'd say there is revenue here that we think we can drive at the chain level, but we expect it to be smaller than the revenue that we'll be able to drive through the business by enabling more applications that people actually want to use through our consumer interfaces.
Nice. Santi, anything we're missing here?
No, Jesse, I mean, we've covered a lot. It's really great to get your insight into how the decision-making process that happens in an organization. And I think at minimum, people really gain a better appreciation of. It's pretty remarkable to see a public company. We used to think of Coinbase as this like slow-moving organization, invariably as you grow and as you become a public company. But it's really interesting to see the inner workings, and it sounds like there's a lot of stuff happening in there. And I'd almost love to see that whiteboard and how it evolves. because it's really great that you guys are contributing to the ecosystem and really just recognizing that for you guys to survive in this kind of fast-paced open source environment, you're going to have to adapt really quickly. Otherwise, you're going to fall prey to, the innovator's dilemma, so to speak. We covered a lot. I don't know if there's anything in particular that you want to emphasize or leave, want to focus more on for the benefit of our listeners.
I guess two thoughts. One is, I think, one of the things that's been most exciting about the last while building Base is the cultural impact of having this platform internally. And in many ways, like, that's been the thing I've been most focused on for the last 2 years. It's like, how do we actually start to change our internal culture so people want to build on chain by default? Because there's all this inertia that's, our revenue, our activity, the infrastructure that exists off chain. And I think for the first time after like 2 years of trying, something about having this platform has started to change the culture, where people now feel a new level of energy, excitement, resurgence to be like, I want to try and build this thing on chain instead of off chain. And so I'd say, like, one thing that might be interesting for your listeners who are likely, maybe some are in kind of web 3 companies, but there's probably a lot of people who are in Web 2 companies and who might be in a similar place of feeling like, how do I get these companies to be, the company I'm in to be more crypto forward, crypto native? I'd say, like, think about that and think about this story in the context of that. It's like, what is the cultural change that you're going to be able to make? And how do you make that like a structural change that can drive, long-term behavior change among the employees? So I'd say that's one thing. And then the other thing, and I know we talked about this before, but I just want to go back to Coinbase's secret master plan, and a shout out to Brian on this. In 2016, Brian Armstrong, our CEO, wrote a 4-part plan that was build the protocols, build the exchange, build the consumer interfaces, and then enable the next wave of dApps that are going to bring 1 billion users into the economy and crypto economy. And for the last 7 and change years, that's what we've been doing. And I think the thing that I'm most excited about is in 2023, it feels like we have a line of sight to make it so that those dApps can actually start to emerge. And I think we've seen the beginnings of that over the last few years since DeFi Summer, where we have a small set of financial applications that have product market fit. But the combination of the cost of chains going down, the developer tools getting better, identity starting to be figured out, and account abstraction making wallets easier to use, feel like right now is this moment where we are about a crossover from phase 3 to phase 4. And I'm so excited to be bringing Base into the market in that context and just doing everything we possibly can to make it easier for developers to build useful applications that 1 billion people in the world want to use. So that's what it's all about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Maybe a last question now that as I was hearing you say that is, if we were to have you, a year from now and do a recap of Base and progress, what do you think is going to be the thing that surprises you the most?
I think probably it will be, this is good. I think at some point we're going to, in the next year, and I'm an optimist, and so I've been wrong on timing before, but I think sometime in the next year, maybe the next 2 years, we're going to hit an inflection point in crypto where instead of after literally 10 years of being flat, except for when there were hype-driven growth, we start to have month-over-month growth of users using crypto to do real things. That inflection point is coming in the next 2 weeks, and it's going to start being 10 to 20% month-over-month growth. And that is going to be the beginning of this up curve that somewhere between 5 and 10 years from now, we'll have every single person in the world using crypto every day. And I think the thing that's going to surprise me and surprise people is once we hit that up growth, that inflection point, it's just going to be obvious, like, that this was coming and that this was like, now was the right moment. And my hope is that a year from now, when we're back on here, we're having that conversation instead, where instead of being like, is this a, big bet? How's this for business? It's like, oh my God, the world is literally migrating on chain, just like the world migrated online, just like the world migrated to mobile. Like, wow, what's happening in that context? I think that's the thing I think we might be surprised by.
That's such a great answer, because I think all three of us lived through like the growth of smartphones becoming ubiquitous, and like it was just like the first iPhone was like internet was like really slow and expensive, and there weren't many apps. There was like a lot of infrastructure deficit from the wireless kind of network side of things, and then all of a sudden, like it was like 2-3 years, and I was like, okay, like but like when you're living through it, you look back and you're like, yeah, of course, like, yeah, like, you know, the idea of having everything, your Walkman, your Palm Pilot, and then this thing becoming like a computer, like it's so obvious now, but like Nokia missed it, Microsoft missed it, and we were all living through it, and like we were getting a lot of benefit from it, but we kind of truly didn't see like the full like repercussions of how impactful it would be to our day-to-day interactions, that you can stream a movie on your phone, you can listen to every single music on your phone, and how it changed the music industry, that you can, you know, do pretty much everything from banking to consumer stuff to shopping, like to the point where like you might not even need a computer. Like it's pretty crazy. And I think very few people had that vision and even really kind of in that moment, like realized how impactful it would have been, and still probably will be. And so I think it's a great answer, because even us that we've been here in space for so long, we kind of believe in this, and this is why we're like staking our lives, our reputation, everything. It's not easy, right? Being in the space. It will happen. And sometimes like it's the people that like have been in for so long that you become skeptical of these things actually happening. And once they do, you're like, I guess it's happening.
Yeah.
But I do hope it happens within a year, Jesse. It does feel like the fact that we're seeing you guys really build Base and the rationale behind it in this episode, I think hopefully listeners appreciate, like it does feel like a lot of things are clicking finally on the infrastructure side to really enable credibly millions up to billions of users. And it's kind of primed because there are really also really great teams that we've had on this podcast that, full, you know, disclosure, I'm an investor in, that I think are building really cool front-facing applications that are delivering like true value, not just NFTs, but like a lot of other stuff.
Yeah. I said this on the internet yesterday, but it was, you're in a bear market, crypto bear market. We're at an all-time high of on-chain creativity. And that's really how it's right now. It's like, we have never had a more creative moment in the history of crypto than right now. And yes, it's a bear market, but like, boy, are we in for a ride.
I know you have tattoos, and you're on, but you should tattoo, like, because Will has another tattoo, but I like this more.
Jesse, man, we love having eternal optimists on. You would do well with Santu and me, and I'm excited to hopefully see you in person soon. And thanks again for coming on, and just big congrats on everything that you guys have built. Definitely rooting for you and excited for you.
Thanks.
Yeah, congrats, guys. Fun. Pleasure having you guys, and we should definitely have you on in a year from now.
Love it. Let's do it.
Cheers.